The question of whether Bigfoot is real occupies a strange and persistent space between folklore, science, psychology, and cultural identity. Unlike many mythical creatures, Bigfoot is not confined to ancient legend or distant history. It is a living idea, one that continues to generate sightings, investigations, documentaries, and debate in the modern world. This persistence alone makes the question worth serious analysis, because it suggests that Bigfoot is not merely a relic of superstition, but a phenomenon sustained by something deeper than simple imagination. To analyze Bigfoot's possible reality requires examining not only physical evidence, but also human perception, environmental conditions, and the psychological mechanisms that shape belief. From a biological and scientific standpoint, the existence of an undiscovered large primate in North America presents significant challenges. Large mammals leave traces, bones, consistent DNA, breeding populations, and ecological footprints that can be measured. Despite decades of searches, expeditions, and technological advances such as trail cameras, satellite imaging, and environmental DNA sampling, no conclusive physical evidence has been produced. Footprints, hair samples, and photographs exist, but none have withstood rigorous scrutiny. Hair often turns out to belong to known animals, footprints lack anatomical consistency, and images are typically blurry or ambiguous. This absence of definitive proof is the strongest argument against Bigfoot's literal existence, especially in an era where even elusive species are eventually documented through genetic or photographic means. However, dismissing Bigfoot outright raises its own questions. Reports of encounters are remarkably consistent across time and geography, describing a tall, bipedal, hair-covered figure with human-like movement and intelligence. These accounts are not limited to a single culture or era. Indigenous oral traditions across North America describe beings that closely resemble modern Bigfoot reports, often framed as forest guardians or liminal creatures existing between the human and animal worlds. While oral traditions are not scientific evidence, their consistency suggests that the idea did not emerge randomly in the 20th century. Instead, it may reflect a long-standing human attempt to interpret unfamiliar experiences in dense wilderness environments. Psychologically, Bigfoot sightings can be understood through the way the human brain processes ambiguity, fear, and pattern recognition. Humans are evolutionarily wired to detect agency in their surroundings, especially in environments where survival once depended on quickly identifying threats. Dense forests, low visibility, and unfamiliar sounds create ideal conditions for misinterpretation. A bear standing upright, a shadow moving between trees, or distorted depth perception can easily be transformed into something extraordinary by a brain primed for narrative. Memory further complicates this process, as recollections become reshaped over time, influenced by cultural expectations and repeated retelling. A genuinely frightening but unclear experience can gradually evolve into a more defined encounter with something other. There is also a sociological dimension to Bigfoot belief that cannot be ignored. Bigfoot occupies a symbolic role as a reminder of untamed nature, something existing beyond human control in a world increasingly mapped, monitored, and developed. In this sense, Bigfoot represents resistance to the idea that everything has been cataloged and conquered. Believing in Bigfoot allows space for mystery, for the possibility that the natural world still contains secrets inaccessible to modern systems of knowledge. This symbolic value may help explain why belief persists even when empirical evidence is lacking. Bigfoot is not just an animal, it is an idea that fulfills a psychological and cultural need. At the same time, the commercialization and sensationalism surrounding Bigfoot have undermined serious investigation. Hoaxes, exaggerated claims, and entertainment-driven portrayals blur the line between inquiry and performance. This makes it difficult to separate sincere witnesses from those motivated by attention or profit, and it reinforces skepticism among scientists who might otherwise approach the subject cautiously. The feedback loop between belief, media, and ridicule creates an environment where legitimate discussion becomes polarized, either framed as unquestioning belief or total dismissal, leaving little room for nuanced exploration. Ultimately, whether Bigfoot is real depends on how reality is defined. If reality is limited strictly to organisms verified by reproducible physical evidence, then Bigfoot, as a biological species, almost certainly does not exist. The lack of remains, DNA, or ecological consistency makes that conclusion difficult to escape. However, if reality includes psychological experiences, cultural narratives, and shared human perceptions, then Bigfoot is undeniably real in a different sense. It exists as a modern myth shaped by fear, wonder, and the human relationship with wilderness. People truly see something, feel something, and interpret something, even if the explanation is not a hidden primate. Across cultures and continents, the figure commonly associated with Bigfoot appears again and again in different forms, suggesting not a single creature but a recurring archetype shaped by geography, environment, and cultural worldview. These beings are typically described as large, hairy, humanoid, and elusive, existing on the margins of human civilization in places that are difficult to access or understand. What makes these figures compelling is not just their physical similarity, but the roles they play within their respective cultures. Rather than functioning purely as monsters, they often exist as boundary figures, occupying the space between human and animal, nature and society, the known and the unknowable. Examining these variations reveals more about humanity's shared psychological and symbolic frameworks than about any one biological mystery. The Yeti of the Himalayan region is perhaps the most globally recognized counterpart to Bigfoot. Traditionally known by several names depending on the local culture, the Yeti exists in the folklore of Nepal, Tibet, and Bhutan as a being tied deeply to the spiritual landscape of the mountains. Unlike the often sensationalized Western depiction of a snow-dwelling monster, the Yeti in local traditions is ambiguous in nature. It is sometimes feared, sometimes respected, and occasionally regarded as a spiritual guardian of sacred places. The extreme environment of the Himalayas plays a crucial role in shaping the Yeti's mythos. Vast glaciers, thin air, and unpredictable weather create a setting where survival itself feels supernatural. In such conditions, unexplained tracks in snow distorted sounds, and rare animal encounters can easily become woven into narratives about a powerful, hidden inhabitant of the mountains. The Yeti thus becomes a personification of the landscape's hostility and majesty, reinforcing the idea that humans are outsiders in these high-altitude realms. In Southeast Asia, stories of beings like the orang pendek of Sumatra present a different variation on the theme. The orang pendek is described as shorter and more human-like than Bigfoot, often said to move with intelligence and intention rather than brute force. Reports portray it as shy, curious, and deeply connected to the forest rather than aggressive or threatening. This reflects the dense jungle environment it is said to inhabit, where visibility is limited and encounters are fleeting. The orang pendek's smaller stature aligns with the region's fauna and human populations, making it feel more integrated into the ecosystem rather than an imposing outsider. In this context, the creature represents the intelligence and mystery of the forest itself, an embodiment of what remains unseen beneath the canopy. Australia's Yowie presents yet another regional interpretation, shaped by the continent's isolation and indigenous traditions. Long before European settlement, Aboriginal stories spoke of hairy, human-like beings living in remote bushland. These beings were often portrayed as part of the natural order, sometimes dangerous but not inherently evil. After colonization, Yowie sightings became entangled with European concepts of monsters and wild men, creating a hybrid legend that reflects cultural collision. The Australian landscape, vast and harsh, reinforces the Yowie's role as a symbol of land that resists domination. In a place where survival has always required respect for the environment, the Yowie serves as a reminder that the land is not fully tamed, no matter how modern society becomes. In parts of Russia and Central Asia, the Almaz occupies a space between folklore and anthropological speculation. Descriptions of the Almaz often emphasize its human-like qualities, including the use of simple tools or vocalizations that resemble language. Some accounts portray it not as a beast, but as a relic of an earlier stage of humanity, a surviving remnant of something forgotten. This interpretation reflects a cultural fascination with deep time, ancestry, and the blurred boundaries of human evolution. The vast, sparsely populated regions associated with the Almaz allow for the imagination to stretch backward as well as outward, turning the creature into a symbol of humanity's unresolved origins rather than pure wilderness. Even in Europe, where wilderness is more limited, variations appear in the form of wild men and woodwoses found in medieval folklore. These figures were often depicted as hairy, uncivilized humans living beyond the borders of society. Rather than cryptids in the modern sense, they represented what humans feared becoming if stripped of culture and order. This version of the archetype shifts the focus inward, portraying the wild figure not as an external unknown, but as a reflection of humanity's own suppressed instincts. The persistence of these stories suggests that the Bigfoot-like figure does not require untouched wilderness to exist. It can survive as a psychological symbol even in heavily settled landscapes. Taken together, these global variations suggest that Bigfoot and its counterparts are less likely to be independent biological creatures and more likely manifestations of a shared human response to the unknown. Wherever there are places that feel vast, dangerous, or unexplored, humans tend to imagine beings that belong there more naturally than they do themselves. These figures give shape to fear, respect, and humility in the face of environments that resist full comprehension. They also serve as reminders of humanity's fragile place within the natural world, challenging the assumption that everything can be controlled or categorized. Rather than asking whether all these beings are versions of the same undiscovered species, it may be more revealing to see them as expressions of a universal narrative impulse. The recurring image of the wild, hairy humanoid reflects humanity's ongoing negotiation with nature, evolution, and identity. Each culture reshapes the figure to fit its own environment and values, but the core idea remains strikingly consistent. In this way, Bigfoot, the Yeti, the Yowie, and their many counterparts form a global mythology of the unknown, one that persists not because it has been proven, but because it speaks to something enduring in the human imagination. In the end, Bigfoot may be less a question of zoology and more a mirror reflecting how humans grapple with uncertainty. The enduring fascination reveals a tension between rationalism and imagination, between the desire for proof and the longing for mystery. Bigfoot's power lies not in confirmed existence, but in its ability to persist at the edge of belief, where science, storytelling, and psychology intersect. Whether or not a creature roams the forests, the idea of Bigfoot continues to walk through human culture, carrying with it our unresolved need to believe that the world is still capable of surprising us.